had 2 clients of mine that had mothers who had destinies of 10, and both of these women were old. I mean, they were in their late 80s and 90s, and so I said to them, you know, your mothers both have a destiny of 10, and when they go, they're just going to drop. They're just going to drop like a stone. They're just going to drop. And you don't know how, but you know, sometimes it can be young, sometimes it can be old, but it can just drop like a stone. And they were like, oh, they're fine, they're fine, they're fine. I said, I'm just warning you, they're going to drop like a stone. And one of them said, oh my gosh, my mother died today. They called me and said, my mother died today. My mother drove home from church. We found her car in the driveway, parked and turned off, and she'd had a massive heart attack and she was dead at the wheel. And she'd managed to get the car home and park the car and the whole 9 yards, dead as a doornail. The other one, she was went in to see her mother, and her mother looked like she was asleep in her chair and she was dead. She had been watching television and she had a book in her lap, and she literally just turned the book over and put it in her lap, and happy, just nice little look on her face. So what's weird is 10 exit is sort of fast and not unpleasant. I mean, you know, it's not the worst way to go. Now, somebody who has a destiny of 4, like this person right here, destinies of 4 mean that they have the destiny of neutral mind, and they want that perfect harmony and balance and neutrality and win-win and cooperation. So they're practicing peacefulness as they get older. So destinies of 4 oftentimes are pretty peaceful and relaxed. They're as they get older, they live a long time, you know, because they're calm. They're not stressing a lot as they get older. They're more self-accepting. They're not going to bother people a lot. They're just going to do their own thing and putter around and stuff like that. But the destiny of 4 is not dying anywhere very quickly. Now, somebody who has a destiny of 2, so a 2, 11, a 211 has quite a few ranges of extremes. So Edgar Allan Poe had a destiny of 211. And so notice his death. His death was, again, related to kind of going out of control, related to drugs, which is the 11. So the 11 can be that obsessive-compulsive drug addiction kind of number. And you can see with Edgar Allan Poe's numbers, he pulled into the 2. So his stories are dark, negative, you know, moody, intense, scary, you know, so that critical negative mind, the telltale heart, and all those kinds of things. Like they're very well thought through, but they're kind of scary, and they're kind of illusion based, which is that 11 in there. So that 11 is kind of fragmented and all over the place. And yet there's a brilliance with that. I mean, so a destiny of an 11-2 is a mastery destiny number, and it's a really incredible thing, but it's also really stressful because they're trying to go for cosmic consciousness. They're trying to go to be awake. They're trying to transcend this physical form. They want to leave a legacy. They want to leave an impact. Obviously, Edgar Allan Poe did that. Another example of a destiny 2 of 11 is, went right out of my head. The guy that did Caesar, what was his name, the actor that was married to Elizabeth Taylor? Richard Burton, there we go. It comes in eventually. So Richard Burton has a destiny of 211. So notice, did he leave a legacy? You bet. Look at all those incredible movies that we know him forever as Caesar. He'll always be Caesar to us. So here's that incredible part of him that is that 11, which is a Leonardo da Vinci. He could be any character at all. He could change around and do all sorts of things. He was brilliant. But that 2, he was also a lot to handle. I mean, so from, didn't know them, but from the stories you hear, which you can take to be true or not true, so we're dealing with these people as archetypes, not as real people per se. So the persona, the media persona that we actually see in them. The 2, I mean, he and Elizabeth Taylor would yell and scream at each other and get drunk and hit each other and be wild and crazy, and there's the 2. So there's that 2 in there. Now I wasn't there, but that's what you hear as the media archetype for these people. Then you've got a destiny of 6, and a destiny of 6 is a person who, as they get older, they want to be a hermit. So the 6 again is Saint Hildegard. It's the hermit. It wants quiet and solitude and peacefulness. It wants to stay at home and knit. It doesn't want to be bothered by a lot of crazy things. It has that quiet little place that it wants to be. Destinies of 6 live a long time, but what's weird about 6s is that they live a little longer than they want to, but they do have major health things as they go along. So what's interesting is that I always use one of my clients as an example, and he had a heart scare at 47, lived to 93, never had a heart attack because he changed his diet and did everything perfect, whereas everyone in his family died of heart disease between 50 and 65, but he did everything correct, right? Because a 6 has a constitution like an Amazon. A person with a destiny of 6 has a very strong constitution. But he also had colon cancer at 62, lived to 93, never had colon cancer or a heart attack. So both of them were fine, right? So 6s, when somebody has a destiny of 6, I tease them and I say, don't not have health insurance because you're going to be using it. And don't, not get Medicare supplements because you're going to be using them. You might want to look at the fact that sometimes a 6 is called the hermit, which means in old age they're alone. So you see oftentimes 6s that even if they have a spouse, that spouse might die at 80 and they live to 93. So it doesn't mean they necessarily get divorced, but it just means there will be a period of time for maybe almost 10 years where they could be alone in old age. So I always try and counsel 6s that I want them to plan for retirement, do a 401k plan, put the money away, have a house that's paid for by the time they retire, have a house that's all on one level for retirement, because if you're going to be 93, we don't want to be shoveling snow or needing to drive to the grocery store or all that kind of thing. So you want to think like, okay, Montana, middle of nowhere, chopping wood is probably a no-no, and we probably want to stay in town, and you kind of plan it out in your head a little bit. But destinies of 6 are pretty hardy. Now, I've seen destinies of 6 die young, but they did everything wrong. So I had one woman who had a destiny of 6, and I was doing a full reading on her. So her numbers had a weird thing going on, and then her palm had a big weird thing going on, and their cards were like terrible disaster was going on. And I told her, I said, what's wrong with you? And she said, I'm fine. And I said, you're not fine, and your numbers are not fine, your hand's not fine, your cards are not fine, you're not fine, so what's wrong? She goes, well, I have this lump in my breast. And I said, well, how big is it? And she said, the size of my fist. And I was like, okay, how long has this been going on? 1.5 years. And you didn't get this checked? And she was like, no. And I said, okay, you have a destiny of 6, you're strong as an ox, and you have a constitution of an Amazon, but you still can't push fate. And you need to go get checked, and you need to do whatever the doctor says to do, because this is about 6s have to do what they're supposed to do. I mean, a 6 says, you don't do it, you're going to die. If you do it, you'll live. It's really simple. So she went to the doctor. It was cancer. They wanted to do a double radical mastectomy, the chemo, the radiation. She didn't want to do that. She did a lumpectomy and spent 2.5 years dying. Okay? So again, if she caught it early when it was happening, if she'd done everything right, she could have made it out of that. But, even maybe if she had done everything, I don't know, but if she'd maybe done everything the doctors say, but that 6 can die early because they do get health things, but if you do the right thing, they don't die. So then if somebody has a destiny of 7, again, the 7 is about strategies and structures, and so you think, okay, in old age, what is structure? Your bones. So a person who has a destiny of 7, your structure, your foundation is usually your bones. So 7s live a long time. They don't die very quickly, but they have structure weaknesses as they age. Bad bones, bad back, fused hip replacement, fused ankles, things like that. So you can sometimes see people who have a destiny of 7, and again, this is not straight across the board. You see these anomalies that come in, and the restriction, I had a client of mine whose restriction was MS. So he actually had MS, so he got MS as he was in his 40s, and so then, he was dealing with the MS, which is a restriction energy, so you can't move and you can't walk and things like that. I've seen other people with MD, muscular dystrophy, again, restriction, having trouble breathing, so all that. Then you've also got people, I had another example, I had a woman who, her structure weakness, she was in her 80s, and her lymphatic system started to fail, so her legs started to swell, and she had trouble putting her shoes on, and then she had trouble walking very far because her legs were swelling, but her lymphatic system was breaking down, so she wasn't pulling fluid out of her legs. So again, it's a structure weakness. It wouldn't kill her, but she couldn't walk around very much, so she felt restricted to her home a little bit. So I tell people who have a destiny of 7 that you want to be aware of what the potential weakness is. You know, if you have bad back, stay on top of that. If you have bad hips, stay on top of that. Be aware that you got a restriction that will show up as you age, and the more you're conscious of it, then the less problems you'll have with it as you age. If somebody has a destiny of 8, a destiny of 8 is about grief and loss and sadness and prana and breath. And so people who have a destiny of 8 oftentimes die related to breathing problems in some way. Now this can mean that I tell people who have a destiny of 8 that it's also about being outside and being on the land and taking that big deep breath of fresh air. So 8s oftentimes want land in old age. They don't want to be in the city. They want 20 acres and all that kind of stuff. And they love that. It's beautiful. But they need to be careful of their breathing. So I tell people who have a destiny of 8 when they're older, get your pneumonia shot that lasts for 10 years. Get your flu shot every year because it's a respiratory disease. So, you know, somehow they get this kind of congestive thing related to the breathing. And I tell people if they have a destiny of 8 and they smoke, it's a really bad sign. So they really shouldn't smoke because it's related to breath and prana. And I mean, I've had a lot of clients that were smokers and their numbers were like fine. They were cancer fine. They were, I mean, some people are built so strong, it's unbelievable. So, but it's when the number shows up in an area, and then if you're doing an addictive pattern or you're doing something that's not supporting that part of your body, it will magnify it as you get older in age. If somebody has a destiny of 9, a destiny of 9 means the older they get, the more intuitive they get, the sweeter they get, the more emotional they get, the more perceptive they get, the more of a feeler they become. And this is a good and a bad thing because you can imagine that it could get a little much. I mean, so you could get so perceptive and so sensitive that you're just like, ooh, I don't want to deal with people at all. And so a destiny of 9 either is very functional in the intuitive realms and they're very mystical as an older person and they're like the wise woman that's doing the cards for the grand